Hello, friends. Welcome to another episode of Area 312. I'm one of your hosts, Kent, along with my co-hosts.
Rax.
Mike.
Friends, today we are super stoked. We have drummer for Gardian, 1984 through roughly 1990, the classic, the seminal First Watch album, came out on Enigma Records in 1989. Mr. Rikk Hart, welcome, buddy. It's a privilege.
Thank you. It's good to see you guys. And thank you for what you're doing and touching so many people's lives and taking your time to do this. I've been looking forward to it.
And we have too, buddy. I was telling my co-host here, my friends, I did the math today, Rick. Now this is the 20th anniversary edition of First Watch. Mike, hold up yours, buddy.
I got the original that I bought in 1989. So
Wow.
So
that's neat to see.
I traded mine in for the upgrade on the remaster, but Rick, I was telling them at one juncture, I did the math. For 32 years, the only thing that I knew of Rikk Hart was this, and then the insert picture. And
Wow.
I had an opportunity, you know, we've heard Paul's wonderful vocals, the background vocals, seen interviews, you know, with David and Tony, but never have I even heard anything from you. And so this is a privilege, 32 years. And so I just want to stress again how grateful and blessed we are to have you as a guest today. And Rick, I know that, you know, Gardian is one of the very few bands on Enigma Records at the time. It was you guys and Baron Cross and Stryper, so one of three, and I don't think I'm forgetting anybody. I'm recalling the band Mass, but they weren't explicitly a Christian theme band. But Rick, I know that you and Stryper go, Gardian and Stryper, you know, had a bond back then, and probably still do. But we were discussing off camera a little bit about Stryper, and you were going to tell us something.
Yeah, we were very closely tied to those guys. It's an interesting story though, because gosh, you know, I could talk a long time just about that, but I actually, while I was in high school, or there shortly after, was introduced to Stryper through a demo tape that this guy played for me, and he was the manager of the band that I was in at the time. He said, "You got to hear these guys." So I listened, and I was completely blown away. And then he called me, this is sort of the condensed version, he called me and said, "Hey, they're doing a show at Radio City." This is a club in Anaheim, California. They're doing a show at Radio City, and you want to go? And I said, yeah, for sure. So I go to this show, and I'd already played Radio City and stuff, you know, before that. And so I went, and it was full of people. And then I see Robert's drums all stacked over in the corner, and my friend Eric Blair sitting there guarding the drums. And I said, "Eric, what are you doing here?" He says, "Oh, I'm a roadie for this band." I said, "You're kidding me." So yeah, so then like I said, condensed version, they came on stage, and you had to be there, but the guy that owned the club, I think his name was Jerry Roach or something like that, and he used to turn the heat up full blast. And so you picture this pitch black club room, and it's roasting hot in there. people are so people buy drinks. That
Right.
was the idea. And then these little pin lights coming out of the ceiling. So all the lights are out. You see the pin lights. And then as they're coming on, I see these people holding up Bibles. And it was really shocking for me. It was like, wow, what's going on here? This is wild. It's wild. And then they went on, and it was just like your hair was blown back. It was just unbelievable. And to be there that night is very hard to describe in words, but God was just on fire in that room. And so after that, that's when I went home and said, well, if you're up there, prove it. And that was my start in walking with Jesus. So that's how my connection started with Stryper. And if you had told me that night that one day, you know, Oz is going to produce your record, you're going to be on the same record label as they are, they're going to be hanging with you, you're going to be hanging with them, and you're going to join the fight, I would have never believed it.
Rick, about what year was that?
1984.
Okay.
Yeah, 1984.
That's awesome, Rick. So, am I understanding correctly? Did you ask Christ? Was that the night that you asked Christ into your heart?
Yeah.
That is so awesome.
That was the beginning of my walk.
Very cool.
Yeah. And then it kind of goes from there. Drumming was my thing. And so I was always my thing. And I happened to be, I think it was that summer, sitting by a pool, and I thought, maybe I should drum for the Lord too. You know, there was not this thought, I'm going to do this. You know, you have to remember that Stryper was such a one-off. There was nothing else like it. So it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to jump on this bandwagon. It had nothing to do with that at all. I just thought, well, maybe I should do this. So I happen to have this thing called the recycler, and I open the recycler, and looking through it, I see this advertisement. It says, looking for a Christian drummer. And I thought, maybe I'll give that number a call and see what happens. So I called, and it was Paul. We talked for a little while, and he asked me how long I'd been a Christian. That was important to him. And it wasn't very long, a few months or whatever it was. And he invited me to come down to the studio to meet with everybody. And so I loaded up my stuff in the trunk in the car and stuffed it everywhere I could. And I drove down to the studio in Santa Ana and brought all my stuff in, and I set it up, and David was there, and then there was two other guys, so they were like a 5-piece. And I set everything up, and then they had some songs, and they were kind of more of a journey type of sound, progressive journey. And I loved all that stuff then. I think we all connected a lot musically. And it went very well. We really gelled together as a group. And we hit it off. And by the time I was done, I probably did a little solo work for them to kind of show them, you know, kind of where I was at drumming wise. And after that, and everything was finished, it was apparent that it was a good fit, and I was in the group. So it wasn't any sort of welcome. You know, you pass the audition. It was just kind of like, okay, let's go. What's next? You know, and that's how it all started. So I just left all my equipment there. You know, I didn't pack it up and put it back in the car. I just left it there, and that was it. And that's how it started.
Very cool. Speaking of starting out, Rick, when did you begin playing drums? You mentioned that you were always kind of in the drum mode. So when did you first start playing drums, and who were some of your influences that drew you to your instrument of choice?
That's a good question. I actually got my first drum set when I was 4. I think what happened was I was maybe two or 3, and I would be sitting, this is, you know, the 60s, and I would be sitting in this neighbor's Buick Riviera, and I would put in, my first introduction to music was Sgt. Pepper's, the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's. So I was taking the 8-track and putting that in the deck and just sitting there listening to it, and they couldn't get me out of the car. And I was doing it all the time. I'd walk out there and put that 8-track in and listen to that thing. And I started banging on everything in some sort of a rhythmic fashion. And my mother thought, you know, I should get him a drum set. So this is, you know, like I said, this is probably 1967. So it's not like it was a common thing, but she just felt led to get me a little drum set. I was actually named after Ricky Nelson because I went by Ricky for a long time as a little one. And she was a huge Ricky Nelson fan. So she was always sort of big into music anyway. And she had me very young. She was 17. And my dad was in the Navy at the time when I was born. And so I always had music around, and I started banging on things. She got me the drum set, and I pretty much filled it with holes after a week and kind of trashed it. But that was my first start musically. And then influences at that time were the Beatles. And then if I kind of think back, then it went to Stevie Wonder. Around 2nd grade time, I was heavy into Stevie Wonder. And then 3rd grade, I asked for a record player for my birthday. And I wanted the Yellow Brick Road album by Elton John. And my introduction to Elton John was I was at this place they used to have on SoCal where you'd kind of slide down a big slide on a bean sack sort of thing. And then they'd have this kind of restaurant snack bar. So this guy walked up to the box and put some change in it. And we're all sitting there eating. And all of a sudden, the beginning of Benny and the Jets started. And I just stopped. And I was like, what is that? What is that? And all I could do was listen to that. And so then I got heavy into Elton John and the Guess Who, the Classics 4, and that kind of started my musical journey as a youngster. I had a really sort of an adult taste for music. While the other kids were listening to whatever it was, I always wanted what the adults were listening to. It was always that way for me since, 2-3 years old. And it just spoke to me. And then I got heavy into Peter Frampton, another thing where I happened to be at a little friend's house. I was in 4th grade and she had a sister and a bunch of teenagers. They were sitting around a record player listening to Frampton Comes Alive. And again, I was like, what is that? And it just kind of opened my eyes to a whole new thing with guitar playing and music. And so then at the time, I had begged my mother repeatedly for that album. And so I think I got it for my birthday or Christmas or something as a present, the double cassette. And then it was pretty much just me, my little cassette player, and that double cassette for month after month. I just walked around and played that thing and wore it out. And that was pretty much the start. And then I got into Kiss real heavy, and Peter Criss and all of that, and had all the Kiss posters on my wall. And there was never any sort of faith-based anything in my life growing up. It was always all those bands and that sort of environment. So I guess it's no surprise by the time I was 16, I was playing the clubs in Hollywood, you know.
Rick, was Stryper actually your first exposure to, that you were aware of, your first exposure to a rock band that had a Christian theme to it?
Absolutely.
The reason why I was asking,
yeah, no doubt.
All these bands you're naming, I think between Mike and Rex and I, we love about all those bands that you've mentioned. And, you know, when I was born again, I received the Lord. My walk began with the Lord in 1980, circa 1981. And I came from the Kiss camp as well. I had all the 8 tracks up to Unmasked. That was the last album that was released that I had purchased before I received the Lord. And Petra was my first exposure, the classic Petra with Greg X Volts. So I just didn't know if you know, Stryper was your eye-opening experience of, hey, music can be this good and of the Lord, you know? And
oh, it was mind-blowing. You know, the thing for me was, I always knew God existed. From the time I was a little kid, if I got in trouble, I'd say, you know, God, get me out of this, and I'll never do it again. And it was, you know, serious sometimes. And you know, and I would say, you know, get me out of this. I'll never do it again. Or maybe I didn't do anything, but it was, you know, something, I was in trouble or whatever. And I always knew that God existed. Nobody ever shared that with me. I just sort of knew it from a very early age. The thing for me was, I never did any of the drugs. And so when I was playing these clubs when I was 16 in Hollywood and Orange County, I was playing with guys that were in their late 20s. And then I would, in those days, they'd kind of have to sneak me in. It was a little more, it was different then. So they'd be smoking pot and everything else and getting loaded and jamming. And I would say, no, that's okay. That's not my thing. You know, I'm just here for the music. So I always felt that I couldn't do that and play. How's that going to work? Because those two, the sex, the drugs, and the rock and roll go hand in hand. How are you going to do the rock and roll without the other part? And Stryper was, the light bulb went off that I can have the hair, I can rock and roll with the best of them, but I don't have to live the life that goes along with that. And so that was, you know, a real eye-opener. And then, you know, as I got in the group and I would talk to people, I would say, you know, we party, we have a great time, but we're not doing any of the drugs. We're not doing any of the other stuff. It's just the music and the Lord, that's it. And so they allowed me to see that you could be in the world and be in that business without doing the rest of it. Because I knew for me, there was no other way. I couldn't do the other. I knew that was not of God, and I could not use my talent and do the drugs at the same time. It was just not going to work. I didn't want to be diluted on my instrument. I felt like there was something horribly wrong with that. So that's kind of how I feel about that anyways. And that was my introduction to, hey, it's possible to do all that without the other stuff. I
Rikk,
still feel that way today.
Yeah, absolutely. Skipping ahead a little bit, Rikk, your story there kind of prompted me with a couple of questions. You said you were 16 when you first started playing the clubs and the strips and stuff around there. Number one, were your parents happy with you doing that? Were they supportive? And then number two is, once you got in with Gardian, was that kind of something eye-opening to your parents, something new? Hey, we're doing this for the Lord?
Well, actually, my dad left when I was 4. So I moved around Southern California a lot. And to the degree where, I might live in 3 different places. Like, for example, in 7th grade, I went to 3 different schools. In 8th grade, I went to one school in Carlsbad, California, but I lived in 3 different places. So I was pretty much on my own at a young age, hitting the streets, always out, talking to people, wandering the neighborhood. Like, I remember, I'm thinking back in let's say between 4th and 6th grade, there's so many things that went on in that younger period of my life, with moving here, moving there, meeting different people, going different places. And I would talk to anybody. So, for example, there was a guy that I lived in an apartment by him, and this is when Boston first came out. And he was playing this all the time. And so I started pestering him to make me a copy of that record. And I was, 4th grade or something. And so when I think about it now, it's kind of laughable, but there's this little 4th grade kid, and I was tiny. I was a small kid. But hey, day after day, hey, I'd knock on their door. Hey, can you make me a copy of that? And I would bug them until I got a copy of it. And then I'd get it, and I would just sit there and play it just over and over and over. I'd go to the pool, I'd play the, So I was always running somewhere, running amok, doing something. And I grew up that way. So my father wasn't around. My mom was always very busy just keeping a roof over her head.
Mm-hmm.
And she was heavy into music too. So the Fleetwood Mac Rumors album was playing constantly at home. Chicago, early Chicago. She wouldn't be home, and I'd put the Chicago record on, or the Rumors record. And, if you had told me one day I was actually going to be recording my record where they recorded Rumors when I was a little kid, I would have never believed that either. There's all sorts of interesting stories, there. But so by the time my mom always supported my playing. So, going to playing a club in Hollywood at 16 years old and spending the night at the guitar player's house after the show or whatever, it didn't matter. I was on the go, always.
Welcome to the
So it was just kind of the way things were for me. It wasn't a parental thing. Are we behind this? Are we, do we support this? I listened to whatever I wanted to. I was really into Cheap Trick, 7th, 8th grade, and had those records. And, music, I had drumsticks necklace around my, it was my life. Music was everything. That's all I did. That, and, I come from the on any Sunday culture with the motocross, the Steve McQueen movie.
Mm-hmm.
I was going out with the family because I was very close to my grandparents and my aunt and my uncle. and his family spent a good portion of my life actually with my grandparents, growing up with my grandparents, you know, and spending time with them, and my grandfather. So I was going to the desert all the time and riding motocross. That was sort of on any Sunday, you know, it was going out there and doing all that growing up too. So that was kind of the other thing that I was doing, but it was always music for me. So doing the clubs, doing the shows, spending the night at people's houses and getting up after, and, you know, I was on my own. I you know, I was a free spirit pretty much growing up that way. So there was always support from my mom musically.
Very cool. So everything kind of naturally evolved, so to speak, with you then regarding the music. And then, Rick, if you don't mind, let's jump ahead a little bit. Well, you mentioned Stryper in 1984. Now, we've done our research, Rick, and if I get something wrong in the timeline or one of us, please by all means correct us. We were trying to, you know, do our research as we should. And
Sure.
In 1984, the way that I interpreted this, you joined the band Fusion, who would later become Gardian, and you became the drummer. You had mentioned that you got with Paul, and David was also there, David Bach, and two others you said, and you just clicked, and that first meetup, you left the drums there.
Yeah.
So at that time, you were Fusion in 1984, right?
Right.
Okay. So Fusion, was that where Gardian, the precursor to Gardian, in 84, were you all adorning the body armor stage wear at that time? I know that it was based upon Ephesians 6, putting on the full armor of God. If that was the time that you all began donning the body armor as stage wear, what was your take on it? You know, hey, this is kind of cool because it was a sign of the times. Everybody had their own, you know, you had to do something to set you apart. So were you thinking, hey, this is kind of different but cool? Or were you kind of like, whoa, what's this? Or how did all the stage wear come about?
I was really into sci-fi and Kiss.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was all for it. I thought it was a great idea. It was Star Wars meets heavy metal meets Kiss, and I loved it. I thought the concept was great. It was different. It would set us apart. The whole space thing with music, you know, I haven't mentioned Rush yet, but I mean, that's my favorite band. And, you know, from 16 on, Van Halen and Rush sums it up for me. It was Van Halen and Rush. And so those two really are responsible for my drumming style and you know, the contrast there, but yeah, more so Rush than anything.
Very cool.
And so the music was very progressive, and it was spacey. And so it, you know, I was so heavy into the 2112 album by Rush, which is all spacey stuff. At least half the record was, and futuristic. So the concept of futuristic metal was something that I really identified with and thought had a ton of potential. So I was all for it.
So was it your idea, Rick, for the costumes? Was that your idea, or was it someone else's idea in the band?
This was Paul's idea entirely. This was all Paul Cawley, his concept. His brother built the armor, all the pieces. The scripture reference, all of that was Paul. It was all this vision he had, this futuristic soldier. And it was Fusion. It wasn't even Gardian yet. It was Fusion, but this was the idea and the concept. And we just started building on that over time. And we eventually, you know, had the helmets and the capes and the whole bit, you know, so, but yeah, and the colors, the different colors, everybody had their own color. So, but that was all Paul's idea.
Okay.
Yeah.
So at about what point did Tony come into the band and you had the lineup that appears on the first album?
Good question. We went through some guitar players. I don't want to bounce around too much, but we were actually signed as a trio to Enigma Records. And I can go into that later, but we were signed as a trio. Tony is sort of on the back end of all of that. I actually put an ad out in the Recycler for a guitar player, because at the time we had a really good guitar player, Dave Caro, but he had moved really far away. I don't know, it was 3 hours or something, and he was having trouble committing to the rehearsal schedule and the stuff that we needed to do. And it just kind of became apparent that, you know, for us, in order for us to continue at a professional level, we needed somebody that was going to be able to dedicate themselves at the level we did. And that meant rehearsals 3 nights a week. We rehearsed 3 nights a week, rain or shine, Monday, Wednesday, Thursday. That's on top of anything we would do on the weekend with the band or otherwise during the week as time went on. But that rehearsal schedule, Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, was in stone. And, you know, we needed somebody that could be dedicated to what we were doing at that level. So I put an ad out. And I think the other guys were really hesitant because we all really liked Dave Caro, and he's got such a sweet spirit. And he really had an Eddie Van Halen vibe thing going on. He kind of looked like early Eddie Van Halen. He sounded like, you know, which for us was great. But he just didn't, he wasn't able to commit at the level we needed. So I put it out, and Tony called me. I talked to Tony. I invited him to come over to my place. He did. I showed him a video that we had done at a college, and played him several songs, and we spent the whole evening talking. The interesting part about it, though, is, you know, a lot of crazy things happened back then, and hard to put into words. You know, in today's world, it sounds kind of crazy, but in those days, a lot of interesting things happened. God worked in some mysterious ways. But when he got out of the car and he stood up, you know, Tony's a big guy. He's like 6'2", and the rest of us are not 6'2". So we were very image conscious. And the first thought I had was, well, they'll never let this guy in the band. He's too tall, you know. And but on the other end of that, there's something that just told me he's going to be in our group. I felt like God was saying, that's your guitar player. And I think I told him that. And it was kind of like, well, we'll see, you know. But the evening went well. And from that point, I invited him to some shows. So then he started showing up at the shows to see how we were performing, to hear the songs and what we were doing. And he went to several of those over time. And then I started talking to the guys in the band about him. I talked to David and Paul and said, hey, this guy Tony, you know, so on and so forth. I introduced him to the guys. Then he kept going to the shows. And then in the meantime, the other guy was having trouble making rehearsals and all of that. And so then I said, you know, hey, Tony, why don't you come to the studio and the guys can see what you're doing. And in those days, Tony played his guitar very high, and he played a lot of jazz riffs and things, and didn't have the bite and all the edge that had developed later in time. And in fact, you know, I was I was a little different in those days, and a little forward and assertive. And I know now it sounds laughable, but it's all true story. I was like, well, you got to get a little edge on the guitar, you know. These little are good, but it's got to have more kick to it, you know. It's good. So Tony was really into sort of, if my memory serves me right, like maybe, and I don't want to get this wrong, but like Saga or whatever. He was into sort of the new wave thing. And his hair had the new wave look and all of that. So if you look at early stuff, his hair was not like it ended up being, you know, it was, so things were different in those days. So he was, you know, his guitar was high, he was playing these sort of jazz riffs and things, and eventually the guitar got lower and lower and lower, more and more edge, you know, and it developed into the Tony that we know today. But it didn't start out that way. So he's unloading his gear, and he actually, I remember he sliced his index finger. He has his left one, which is the one he uses all the time, you know. And I'm like, because we're getting the gear out of his car, and the guy show up and his poor fingers bleed, and he sliced it up, and here he's supposed to be playing for them. And but he did, he played, and we talked, and it was a process. It took time. And eventually, you know, he and David hit it off. They both liked sushi, which was a new thing then, you know.
Yeah.
And I said, oh, well, he likes sushi. You can't go wrong, David. You know, I was trying to sell him on Tony, you know. It was, you know, Paul was like, he's too tall. I don't know if this is going to work. You know, it's going to look weird. Or, you know, there was all these things that were going on. And I kept pushing and pushing. And I almost think I kind of threatened to leave with Tony if they wouldn't let him in. You know, so I knew at that time, you know, I was a little bit of a different guy then than I am today. And I knew he was what we needed in our arsenal as a band. We needed a guitar player at that level. And I think that if you listen to the first Watch record, nobody's going to dispute that with me today. That, you know, I mean, our first conversation was, he said, oh, I've been studying with this guy, Joe Satriani. And I said, who's that? I didn't even know who that was. I was like, okay, you know.
Wow.
So, yeah, now looking back, it's wild, you know. And so,
Yeah.
well, of course, when you listen to him, you listen to Joe Satriani. This is 85 or whatever, you know, this is a long time ago. And I didn't even know who the guy was, you know. So this is how Tony joined our band. I had to strong arm the other two guys to actually get him in. But I felt like this is what we needed. And I feel bad because Dave Carr was such a great guy. And I've communicated with him recently. But it just wasn't to be. So that's how Tony joined the band. And I will say, he didn't want anything to do with the armor. He didn't want nothing to do with it. In fact, he didn't even like the color of his guy. He was like, you got to change it to turquoise. I don't want to wear yellow. So, you know, he went with it, but reluctantly. He was not into the whole armor and the space thing, and that was not his thing at all. But to his credit, he went with it. And, you know, also, you got to remember, we had a record contract when he joined the band. We're already signed. And in those days, again, it's so different today. But in those days, if you had a record deal, you had made it. That was it. You know, you were going. There weren't that many that had record deals. So if you had one, you had already established yourself at a certain level for them to do a deal with you. So we already had a deal.
Yeah, and since you guys did that first album with Enigma, now, of course, that was also Stryper's label at the time. Did the relationship there help bring that about? Or?
Well, the goal, should we get into kind of how we got the deal? Maybe I can kind of talk a little bit about that.
That's what something I was going to ask leading up to that, Rick. And I had some notes about the 6-song EP that you and Paul and David recorded, Rockin' Victory. I was going to ask you about the songs on that EP, and then, from my understanding, it was your buddy Eric Blair, and I know Eric. I don't know Eric, but I know the Blaring Out show. But from my understanding, Eric pitched that EP in '84 that you recorded as Fusion, Rockin' Victory. Am I correct in believing that he pitched that to Wesley Hine and Enigma?
Yeah, it's right here. This is the cassette.
Can you hold it closer to the camera?
Sure.
Yeah, there it is.
Yeah, this was our first product. Here.
Yep.
That's it. And Infused Productions, 1985.
So hold that right there 1 second, Rick. That had Spiritual Warfare, which I know from California Metal, Armored Defense, Your Love Looks to the Future, and flip it over one more time.
Side A. Voyager.
Rockin' Victory, and Step to the Light. Very cool.
Yeah. And then this was the packaging.
Yeah.
And that's what Eric handed Wes Hine, one of these.
Was David going by Max Alpha?
Yes, he was. That was his, that was his space name. And then eventually, because David Biedenbach wasn't really at the time, what he wanted to go with. So he changed it to Max Alpha. And I think Paul was even going to change his last name too. And he didn't. Again, the whole Kiss influence.
Mm-hmm.
And I kept my name the way it was and didn't change it. But yeah, and what the funny part that I realized though is there's actually 4 guys on here. and when we met with Wes, we were a trio. And we decided to go as a trio, more like Rush. That gave us a lot of space in the music for a lot more drums. Obviously, just a lot more room for instrumentation.
Was Paul a lead player too?
Yeah.
Okay. Now.
So everything on this cassette is the 3 of us.
Okay. So your buddy Eric Blair, he pitched that EP to Wes Hine and Enigma, and were you guys signed on the spot, or did you have to showcase? Was he interested and y'all had to showcase for him, or how did that transpire, Rick?
Well, he pestered the heck out of him while they were on tour for a couple of weeks. And, as I recall, he kept saying, you have to listen to this. They're going to make it. He just hammered him. And so he's like, okay, all right. Because they were getting demo tapes by the hundreds, Mm-hmm. So he stuck it in his car on the way home. And he listened, he said, I think we have something here. Something to that effect. So he called and I talked to Wes. And I invited Wes down to our studio. So he drove from LA down to Santa Ana to see us in our studio. So Wes came in and we talked for a while. We had a nice setup there with couches and all that stuff. And we talked a while. And then he said, well, play some songs. So we played some songs for him and gave it our best effort. And then after that, he said, okay, well, I have some good news and some bad news. And of course, we're thinking, oh no, this is it, this is it. And he said, well, first, we want to sign you guys. And of course, we were just, oh God, I can't even tell you what that meant. I mean, the gravity of it was life-changing. Life-changing. We want to sign you guys. We got a record contract. It was, you know, I was very young, you know, it's like, you're kidding me. This is unbelievable. So we got it. He said, the bad news is you need to get a guitar player. So, and that started the process of them sort of Stryperizing us. They wanted us, we were to be the next Stryper. They used the wording, you know, you'll be the next big thing. You know, that was just fact. You'll be the next big thing. That's what's going to happen. And we want the guys in Stryper to produce you and link you very closely with Stryper. That was the idea immediately. So it took a while to get there. And obviously Stryper was so busy. It took a long time for everything to come together. And we still had quite a bit of work to do, not to mention getting the right guitar player, which took quite a while. And then we also did a series of recordings and demos along the way with material so they could hear what we were doing and what we were up to, and picking songs and the direction musically that we wanted to go and they wanted us to go. I actually have this is the cassette here.
Can you hold it a little closer, Rick?
Yeah. Tell me. Is that good?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, Gardian without the U.
That was this one here.
Right.
Sorry, you're getting some glare.
Oh, that's okay.
There you go.
We got
this
it.
one
Yeah.
here.
Yep.
Yeah. So this is it, and then here, we recorded this at Plaza Music, which is we did it, gosh, maybe in a day almost, and then I think Tony did some overdubs, but he was teaching guitar at this music store, and so they had a little studio in the back with an 8-track. Or a 16-track. It was a 16-track. The Rock and Victory cassette was done on an 8-track. We did that at a little guy's home studio by Fullerton College in California. And we knocked that out in like a day, I think. And I'm not sure about any vocal overdubs, but most of it was done in like a day, if I'm not mistaken. And then so I believe we did most of these 15 songs at Plaza Music in a day as well. And this was a sort of a second round of recordings for the stable of music that we had at the time that Wes wanted to hear and see kind of where we were at. And by that time, obviously, Tony was in the band. Here's a list of the songs here.
Let's see here. Across the Universe, Living for the Promise, Hyperdrive, Spiritual Warfare, Saints Battalion. Yeah, a lot of them I recognize.
And then here's the other side.
Rock and Victory, Miracle, When the Time is Right, In a World Without Love, Eclipse. Yep, several of those made it.
Yeah.
So Rick, I don't mean to interrupt, but something I want to say really quick because it merits something. As we were talking off camera, I mentioned the former vodcast that we were doing, which was Stryper Drive. And I actually took that name from your album First Watch, which was Hyperdrive. I took that song and, stuck Stryper in and blended it, So kudos to Gardian. Now, so in '85, you guys, you showcased after Eric had pitched it to Wes Hine. You picked up Tony in early '86, and you recorded another EP, but you changed your name to Voyager. If I'm not mistaken, what was the purpose? Why did you all decide? Did y'all just decide randomly, hey, we're tired of Fusion, let's switch to Voyager? Or what was the reason for that name change?
Well, we never had the name Voyager. Voyager was the first song on our demo.
Okay.
So we never had the name Voyager as a band.
Well, I was, okay, and I apologize. I was mistaken. I had always, the Millennium 8 release that you showed,
Yeah.
demos,
Yeah.
I had always interpreted, because it was listed as like the Voyager and Fusion demos. And I had thought that, because I knew that you guys were Fusion at one time before Gardian, so I had just always thought that Voyager was another name along the route to Gardian that you all picked. But thank you for correcting me, because I learned something here, so very cool.
Yeah. Voyager was the song. Fusion, I never liked. I never liked the name from the beginning. It was not something that I thought would work.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I was pretty assertive in those days.
Right.
So
well,
I didn't like it, and I was vocal about that. But
So
they
is
liked
that-
the idea. So
Is that how you got to Gardian then? Did you all have a discussion? Because that was another question coming up. What was the reason for the breakaway from Fusion to Gardian?
I think there's been some different stories that have circulated, and the guys and I probably have a different take on it. My take on it was that I never thought it would work, and the label didn't like it, and so we needed to change our name. And Fusion, maybe there might have been another band or something, but in any event, we knew we needed to change it. And so we were sitting down, and we had gone through a long list of names, and none of them seemed to work. And this is back when Dave Carr was still in the band. And then I remember I said to Paul, what was that one that you mentioned? There was one that you said that kind of like that. And he goes, oh yeah, Gardian, like that. I go, that's it. That's the one. And so, we started going back and forth on that and talking about it. And we decided we'd go with that and just go with 7 letters, because that was sort of the thing then. And it would make us like Stryper and so on and so forth. So we did the GA, and then Dave Carr did the logo for our first t-shirt and that spacey sort of logo. And we went that way for a while. Even on the California Metal CD, it's spelled that way. And then we eventually changed it to add the U, and that's when I came up with the idea of having our logo like it was spray painted on a stencil. And I thought that was a cool look. Mm-hmm. And so we went with that, and then that's what I put on my bass drum heads, and that's what stuck for that first Watch era of time.
So yeah, hold yours up, Mike, because there you go. And I absolutely love, hold yours back up again, Mike, because I actually, I have the 20th, but I absolutely, whose idea was it to put the cross in the U? That was simplistic, but very effective and cool.
That's an interesting story. Tony had a guy that he knew that was an artist and was going to put the artwork together for the record cover or some involvement there. And he wasn't a Christian. And so he did the logo and thought, well, I remember something to the effect of, he said, well, I thought since you guys were Christians, this would look cool. So he kind of put those little notches in there, and left it. And so that's how that happened, from what I recall. That's how it went. Yeah.
I always liked it. I thought it was cool. You know, when I first bought First Watch. Go ahead, Mike.
I was just going to say, okay, I bought this, like I said, in 1989. I bought it at a Musicland store in my local mall.
Wow.
And I had no idea this was a Christian band, but I was just looking through stuff, and I saw that, and you know, I was just looking at it, and I noticed a little cross in the U, and I went, "Oh, maybe that's a Christian band," because I had started getting into like Stryper and Petra and stuff like that, and then I, you know, started reading some of the names, and I went, of the songs, and I went, oh, yeah, that sounds Christian. So I bought it. That's really a big part of the reason I bought it. So,
interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. I think it's subtle. It's subtle. Another interesting point about that CD is a little history for you. We actually drove to Joshua Tree to do the photo session for that record. And it was bitter cold. I mean, because we did it at sunrise and sunset. So it was an all day thing. We drove out in the night so we could be there for sunrise. And it was so freezing cold that we had jackets on us. And then the guy would set it for the shot and we'd get rid of the jackets. Okay. All right, and then back with the jackets. We were shivering. It was so cold. We were shaking. But we wanted something big. That was the whole idea. And I really dug U2's Joshua Tree album very much. And I guess collectively we felt like that vastness of Joshua Tree tied into our sound and how we felt about our music and the band at the time. That was just sort of a vast thing. We wanted it to be a big thing, something big. And we thought that that's sort of God's country. It's huge. And that would be good for what we wanted to do. So we did that, and we got the big panoramic shot, and then we did it in color. So it sort of was that U2 thing, but in color. And I'm not too sure about the rest of it in terms of the layout and all of that. It was just, we were going for sort of a big panoramic shot with some black space and sort of a simplistic look to it.
So I was going to say, with the record company kind of trying to make you guys the next Stryper, I guess, and of course Oz Fox is credited as the producer on the album. Did you guys actually develop a good relationship with Stryper then as a process, or as a part of that, or?
Well, they were always around us, and we were always around them.
Okay.
So they were so supportive. They were always at the shows. They would come to the studio, hang out with us. We had these Wednesday night Bible study things where we invited people to hang out with us, and they just started showing up. And so we kind of made it a Wednesday night thing, and we'd have, whether it be Bob Beeman or whatever, speak a little bit to everybody, and then we do some songs and pray, and we did that for years. And they would pop by, it was always a thrill, oh, Robert's here, Oz is here, Tim is here, wow, you know, or the, you know, Mike or Tim, Oz, Robert would show up at one of our shows and hang out with us. And of course, by then they're playing the big houses. And so, you know, we would go and see them at a show and, you know, hang around with them. And if they were doing recordings in the studio, we would get invited. And you know, of course, we're all working full-time jobs. So I'd have to take the day off of work and drive to Santa Monica to the Village Recorder where they're doing In God We Trust. And, you know, I was living a double life. Like 1 minute I'm in this rock and roll world doing it for a living. The next minute I'm at, you know, this supply house that I worked at for a long time, you know, on a forklift or something. So it was really a trip. One night you're headlining the Roxy Theater and it's sold out. And the next morning you're at work.
9 to 5.
You know, it's an interesting story. At that time, I worked with Dean DeLeo from Stone Temple Pilots. And Dean and I were very good friends. And we spent a lot of time together at work. He and I would go together, we'd go to lunch together, and we'd sit in his car and listen to Scritti Politti and stuff that he was really into at the time. And his Mazda RX-7, and we, you know, he had a great sound system. So we'd get in there and listen to all the hi-hats and the, you know, all the ear candy. And, you know, this is before he was in Stone Temple Pilots. So, you know, he'd go to our studio because it was close to work, and I'd be banging on the drums for him, you know. It's kind of funny now when you look at how far they went. You know, it's like I had a record deal and Dean didn't have anything. He'd play me demo tapes of him and his brother Robert doing little stuff, you know. So as we're on our way to lunch or something, and in any event, though, you know, it was a different time. But so I would do those shows, and then the next day I'd be at work. And Dean was telling me he was doing the same thing after, obviously, early 90s. I wasn't in the band anymore. He was doing the same thing. He was doing the shows in Hollywood, and then he had actually moved to San Diego to manage a store that I had built for the company we worked for. And so he had a mortgage and all this, and he was doing these shows in Hollywood, and then he would literally do that, drive back and open the store at like 6 o'clock in the morning without sleeping. And I remember, because he and I talk occasionally on the phone, and I remember him saying, it nearly killed me, you know, doing it. So it was tough. It was tough to live that double life. 1 minute you're there, you're sitting there talking to Gene Simmons, and he's got your cassette, you know, in his pocket, you know, and you're talking shop, and then the next minute you're, you know, driving a forklift or driving to San Diego with a truckload of stuff. You know, it was really an interesting thing. I always envied how Stryper was just doing that. All of us in the band were doing that, plus a full-time job paying all the bills. It wasn't, and both on a professional level. So, you know, we didn't all live in an apartment together and, you know, work part-time at Guitar Center and then do our group, you know. So, in fact, a couple of the guys had little kids. So, you know, we had a lot going on. We were burning the candle at both ends big time for a long time. It wasn't until we went on the road for the First Watch tour that we actually could leave the job and do that full time.